Hi there, and welcome to Be a Global Citizen, the podcast that explores the concept of global citizenship through the lens of value-creating education. My name is Scott Bauer, and I'm a SOCA researcher and educator. I hope you find the discussions, stories, and insights on this podcast to be valuable and inspiring as we strive to become global citizens who are committed to living a contributive life. Enjoy.
I'm Gonzalo Obelleiro. I'm assistant professor of curriculum studies at DePaul University, and I'm joining from Dallas, Texas.
Hi, Gonzalo. Thank you so much for joining the podcast. I'm so excited to have you. I feel like a special connection with you since we're both graduates from SOCA University of America, and we are separated by 10 years. So you were the first graduating class of SOCA University of America, and then that makes me the 11th graduating class. And just, to make it even better, the DePaul program that you teach at, you were my professor there. So I got to be a student under you, and specifically, I think one of the courses that I took was education for global citizenship. We talk a lot about cosmopolitanism, and really went into the philosophical kind of like roots of a lot of those conversations and discourses. And it was, so wonderful to have that opportunity, and now to kind of circle back and, have this opportunity to like learn how you got to where you are as a educator, as a professor. I think this is going to be really exciting, and I'm looking forward to learning more about your journey. So feel free to start, at any point, because it's not just about the academic influences, although I'm sure there's many, but also some of the personal influences that really brought you to being an educator. So I'll let you share at whatever point you feel is like best.
The idea is that I teach that class, Education for Global Citizenship, in the Public Training Education for Global Citizenship program that we have at DePaul. That's the focus of my expertise, my research is on the philosophy of global citizenship education. I was born in Argentina and grew up there, and I always felt that the idea of identifying with sort of a national culture was a little strange to me, even though my life for like practical purposes was so entirely rooted in the local. It wasn't. I didn't travel anywhere. I didn't have friends that from other countries, or I mean, of course, I had access to the world through the media and stuff. But to me, the idea of like that we are citizens of the world, always, without having that term as a way of naming it, but it always felt like the most natural thing. And when SOCA University of America was going to be established, this was it opened in 2001. The undergraduate program in Los Viejo, which is where we went. I jumped at the opportunity to live abroad and have an experience of an education with this specific focus of global citizenship, and sort of university founded by Daisaku Ikeda, whom I admire. So in 2001 I moved to California. I was at the time I was a student of graphic design in Argentina, and I thought, okay, I'm gonna go to California. I'm gonna take a break from. I was already working, I was still an undergraduate student, but I was already working and as a graphic designer, and I'll take a break from my education, professional life, and this career, and And then after 4 years, I come back and continue. Um, but the experience was so powerful. Uh, the educational experience of going, being there, Suka University of America, that I felt I have to. So it was clearly was something was going on. Something powerful happened, and it wasn't just me. I saw it with other people, my classmates, and we even had these conversations. We recognized something really special was happening here, but I didn't have a way of explaining it even to myself. Um, so I decided to continue my studies and go to graduate school for philosophy of education, um, as a way of being able to explain, find a way of articulate explaining what it is that kind of education, what that experience was for me. Um, and then everything is just going to flows from there. You go, you get uh, spending all this time reading these things and being able to talk to people established in the field, and learning ways of thinking, and particular language. And so after a while you get a degree. Got my PhD. And then then I was lucky to get this opportunity to teach at DePaul, where we have a faculty and a program focused on this idea of value creating education for global citizenship. Um, but for me, it's been all along mostly it's a journey of making sense for myself, what that experience is. And I identify as a student, more than than anything else. Uh, yeah. So.
Wow, thank you so much, Gonzalo. And
Mm,
if I may,
mm,
I can tell that what you experienced at Soka University of America, especially being part of the founding class, it was deeply profound because it brought together young people, right, college age students
mhm,
from different parts of the world to do something that really hadn't been done before, right? Bringing together people to really unite under this idea of global citizenship and to channel their like youthful aspirations and dreams towards making the world a better place. So it had this altruistic flame that I don't really think we see that kind of enshrined in the mission statement of the university, at least, from what I can tell. And so, I kind of wanted to, and also it makes sense that like, your academic pursuits have been really trying to unpack what happened, right, in those formative years of your college experience. And I think that there's something really beautiful of having that focus, and really getting to like the center or the core of that, because again, the mission of Soka University of America is to foster global citizens,
mhm,
right, committed to living a contributive life. And so your research really centers on that question of like, well, what does it really mean, right, to be this citizen of the world? But I wanted to go back to what you mentioned, like very early on, right? You said you were born and raised in Argentina, but you said that there was something about just the kind of like national identity that just didn't quite sit right with you. And I wanted to ask, like, what was it about that that really didn't feel right? And maybe in terms of like how you like like what was your conception of like being Argentinian, and what were some of the ways in which you pushed back on it early on? And then how did that change when you then entered into this environment at SUA, where suddenly maybe you were the only Argentinian or maybe one of very few?
yeah, so, Yeah. Well, I mean, Argentina culturally shares with the United States, for example, the a sense of kind of an exceptionalism. Uh, and I don't know if this is a universal thing. All the cultures have like that, but um, this idea that we are special somehow, that uh, and you would think that it's easier for someone from a culture like the United States in 20th, 21st century to feel that way, being the culture of the country has been most successful in a way, in the history of humanity, militarily, economically, and I mean, in terms of you know being the generators of culture, and um, you would think that it would be more natural to have a sense of exceptionalism than a cultural country like Argentina. But it didn't. The fact that that the global accomplishments of the culture are modest compared to other countries. That didn't make any difference. There was this sense that we are special somehow. Um, and I just thought it was kind of, I don't know, like silly. What? Why? It's not, and yeah. Uh, and I just got the sense that it is so arbitrary. I didn't have a sense per se that there's something wrong about being a nationalist, and it wasn't uh, that I had a kind of a moral commitment against some kind of toxic forms of nationalism, the kinds of this ideology that fuels uh, war or fuels xenophobia or um, I came to adopt the states for that and a moral position against that. But the the first thing for me, the most natural thing was the sense that this is so arbitrary. Um, that why should why should being having been born here should be the most important aspect of my identity. You know, yeah.
Yeah, I resonate with that because,
Mm.
having, like, for myself, been born and raised in the US, it was almost as if, like, our level of exceptionalism was so great to the point where we didn't even feel the need to talk about or even know the existence of probably vast swaths of, of the world, right? Because what's the point, right? But and again, like, I think this connection that we have is very strong because, actually the first time I went abroad was to Buenos Aires in Argentina.
All right.
And so then I got to experience some of the culture there. And definitely there was this feeling, I guess, like, some people kind of might frame it as like being a little bit stuck up, right? Right. That
Yeah, yeah,
they
sure.
they have more important things to do, and that,
Yeah.
they have this pride, right? That they how they carry themselves with. But, once I felt myself, removed from the US, suddenly it was just this kind of like, shock of like, well, like, I don't really matter here. And actually, I don't feel very welcomed either, to be honest. And that it was a very humbling experience.
Mm,
Um, to kind of like experience, like, to really feel what it means to be an outsider, right? And I
mm,
think that was important, at least for my development, is like, kind of almost like dislodging this kind of like ego of, or this assumption that, like, actually, I'm very important, and just based off of like where I was born, right? But you were saying how arbitrary that was. um, when you, like, because travels are very important. You went to the U.S., and what was it that, like, through your interactions with your classmates from different parts of the world, like, how did that have a similar humbling effect to you, or what was that experience like, of like the kind of like widening of possibilities, of perspectives, and how does that inform, or how did that inform your understanding of global citizenship?
mm. Makes me what your reflections remind me of the work of a sort of influential philosopher in this field of theory of global citizenship. It's an American philosopher called Martha Nussbaum, and she identifies two of the sort of dispositions that are central to the cultivation of global citizenship. One is the capacity to adopt a critical perspective towards one's own culture, being able to take distance from it um, and be critical, and having access to a different point of view. It's like really important. It's basic, it's a starting point. I remember when I first came to the US, and I had a conversation with. So the first time I came to the US was I had been accepted to SUA to start in the fall. But the university was having its official dedication, so the founding moment in May, so a few months earlier. But they had already accepted a number of the students that were going to start in August. So they invited us to participate in the festivities. And so the first time I came to the US was for that occasion. And I remember I was roommates with a friend of mine. He ended up being, becoming a friend of mine. And he's from Japan. And I remember that after a few days, spending time together, and I gave me a ride to the airport. He was going to take a flight back to Japan, and he said to me, "Oh, I really respect you," and that was kind of amazing to me, because in Argentinian culture, and I think this is probably all Latin American culture, that would be a really weird thing to say. That you can't, maybe you could tell someone that is very senior, uh, like a living legend, or someone that it's a much higher position socially or otherwise. Oh, I respect you. It would still be a little weird, but you could. But you would never. You can't say that to a peer. Um, it's really hard. But sometimes it's a genuine feeling, right? You want to convey that to someone that is your peer. But in Argentina, you can't say it directly. You could say something like, "Hey, man, I love you, man," that kind of thing. You could show affection, camaraderie, actually, like teasing, even, and to show that you feel this closeness. And maybe after 20 years of friendship, you could say to someone, "Man, I respect you a lot." So I was amazed that in another culture, and I didn't even learn the language. We were talking in English. He's kind of translating from. I ended up then studying Japanese and understanding that in the language is you can say that, and it's natural. He was probably translating from Japanese, saying to me in English. And it was kind of amazing to realize that, here there's something that I don't have in my culture, and it's important. It plays it's a crucial function, culturally, to be able to communicate something so basic, so important, and we don't have it, and we have to do it indirectly, and uh, and it, it's not all laws. I mean, there's something wonderful about how in Argentinian culture you get to communicate this in indirect ways. There's something beautiful about that too. But to me, that the realization that there's you could in other cultures you could just say this directly. It was kind of amazing for me. I was a child. I was very young, so it was the first time I even had that thought that um, that cultures and languages offer, you know, kind of resources for communication, ways of interacting with the world, with other people, and they're all limited and they're different. And uh, I just never thought about that. I thought it was like just a matter of translation. Whatever you feel, you communicate in a language, and you could translate it into another language, and um, yeah, it's a different way of experiencing the
You know,
world when you have these different resources. Yeah.
yeah, that's such a beautiful anecdote that you shared, and it really emphasizes like these kind of cross cultural interactions and like you don't you were like somewhat caught off guard, right? You weren't expecting a comment like
Mm.
that, and it really made you stop and think like what did he mean, and you had to kind of run it by your own filter, right? The only filter really at that time that you had was through Argentina's, and suddenly, right, you were referencing Martha Nussbaum, like suddenly you were finding yourself taking on this critical perspective of, wait, is that what this person's understanding as well? Because then there's so much more feedback that you were getting in that interaction of not just him saying, I respect you, but like the emotion that was conveyed in that, the sincerity behind it. I'm sure he really meant it. And I think that it opens up this world of possibilities of like maybe this person understands the world from like in a different way, and you're kind of like this window has been opened, maybe just it's cracked open, right, in that initial interaction, but like there's a whole nother world that exists through that space, and then that led you to study Japanese, right? Because I think this is something so beautiful about Soka University is that the founder really wanted this to be this kind of home to global citizens, and everyone's coming in with different language backgrounds, but on top of that it's actually a requirement. It's part of the curriculum that you learn a second, third, or fourth language, and so for you that was Japanese, and so you spoke a little bit about like, well, I kind of understood like the basic tenets of like translation, but like there's so much more that went into that, and I'm curious, like what was your experience like already knowing a second language, right? Because that was English. So you knew Spanish and then English. But then now you were adding another language, Japanese, to the mix. Like, what was that process like? Because, the bilingual brain functions differently. Um, and like, would you also say that, through that process, is that the only way to really make sense of like these kind of like new perspectives?
Mm.
Or is it an expedited way? I mean, yeah. What are your thoughts about like the role that language plays in terms of like understanding ourselves as a global citizen?
Well, I mean, learning a language is such a powerful way of experiencing a culture that uh, that if you get an opportunity, you should do it. It should be, and I think it should be in the curriculum for both people, if not all people. Um, I don't think it's the only way to uh, have access to this perspective that uh, or, or cultivate the awareness that uh, there are different ways of experiencing the world. Um, some people seem to have that naturally. They're monolingual. Maybe they lived their entire lives, and I mean, some people don't leave their hometown, you know, and they have these. kind of moral orientation towards the world. Um, but certainly studying a language is a powerful means. My experiences with English and Japanese were very different. The English language is a lot closer to Spanish, and the culture a lot more familiar. The fact that this is kind of a global popular culture that dominated by U.S., like TV shows and movies and all like sort of my heroes, musicians, a lot. American culture is very dominant in that way, and that does a lot for uh, preparing. I came to experience American culture with the background of having the TV shows, the music, the stories were part of my life as a child, because it was there in Argentina, and it was not the same with Japanese culture. A lot of it I was encountering for the first time. Yeah, and yeah, Japan was hard. I remember that I uh, I prided myself on being always very excited and enthusiastic about learning. That was almost like that's part of my identity. I'm the person that's always happy to experience new things and learn, I love being in the situation where I'm not an expert, so I have to figure it out and I make mistakes. But in Japan, I felt like just how hard that is. I remember being just so exhausted, you know, trying to be in conversations with people, trying to figure out what they're saying, understanding 20% what people are saying, and living like that for 6 or 7 hours, just so exhausted. Yeah, I remember that.
I know that feeling very well too. Yeah,
Yeah,
it almost feels like you're breaking your head is like splitting apart sometimes at the end
yeah,
of a long day.
yeah.
And what's
Uh,
really happening is like your brain is just getting rewired.
it might be kind of like the physical pain of that physical change is happening. Yeah, yeah. Wow, I haven't. Oh, that's interesting. I'm gonna investigate
I
that.
mean, I say that because even in my own experience, and this was with learning Spanish. I learned Spanish at SUA, and yeah, for the longest time, I was so frustrated with the language because I just it just wasn't making sense, right? The grammar of it, recalling the words, my own feeling of like what little confidence I had, even to like produce the words and articulate it, and then it took, I would say, even after my study abroad experience, it really took me going back to, well, in this case, I went to Peru, really being immersed in the culture. And I think it was like, it was just kind of like a light switch almost. It's almost like, how like you have like a freeway and like they'll do like maintenance at night and they do all this work and you don't see it and you don't realize it's happening. And then suddenly like the next day, like the road is cleared and it's all paved over and you're driving and you're like, whoa, like I, I didn't realize that, I can pass through here now. And that was kind of like what I experienced. It
Yeah,
was like
amazing.
a sudden transformation.
What an amazing metaphor. I also remember experiencing, uh, because I think in this experience of cross cultural communication, um, you you have opportunities to experience the limitations of the perspective that you bring. Like when interacting with my friend AJ, I um, realized, oh, there's something important that my culture doesn't have, and I can communicate this the same way. Um, you also sometimes get to experience the limitations of the other culture, and that's also part of the and you know and it's not the same as having the prejudice, because I suppose it's also a universal feature of most cultures that we tend to be aware of all that is wrong or limited about other people, uh, but I remember, for example, um, in my particular case, I I come from you know a, I'm a descendant of Europeans. Caucasian. I am like part of the dominant uh, culture. So the intersection of my identities. I'm right there at the center of Argentinian society. I didn't have an experience of being marginalized there. Um, with a few exceptions, but not in the sense of like my identity is associated with something marginal in this world, in this society. Um, and in Japan, I realized I had a few experiences where it was clear that some people had an understanding of the world, of the society, in which someone like me is not at the center. It's, oh, you are an immigrant, you are, uh, oh, it's kind of very cute, very nice how you're learning Japanese, but you'll never really get it. There's, a sense of perception of immigrants from like Western countries as lacking a kind of tact and ability to sort of read the room and be maybe being too loud, acting in a way that is insensitive to people's sensitivities. And Japanese culture excels in that. There's this sense of uh, an unspoken understanding of how you should proceed in every situation so that you don't offend others. And part of it is a sensitivity that you develop. You pay attention to body language and you get a sense. And that's really important. If people do that a lot more than in other cultures that I experience. But there's also uh, it, an agreed upon set of norms in the society that it's very clear. And that is just so important for that culture. So when you don't get it, when you're bad at that, it's not good. It's like if in American society you are just very timid and plagued with self doubt, and you just can't be assertive. You can't you know be ambitious, and like you're missing out on, you're deficient in the thing that is like the most important for that culture. Like it's in American society, you gotta be like go getter and all of that. So I had that experience for the first time. Oh, like the way I am, it's I'm a second class citizen, and this is and this is just all very subtle, and sometimes it's just like uh, decent people, like people who are morally admirable, but you're part of a culture and you participate in these things. Um, and it was what was powerful about that kind of experience was that, you are in this foreign culture trying to understand it. That's the point of being there. You're not just a tourist to, you know, uh, take in what is pleasurable and ignore everything else. You're trying to understand. You're trying to kind of incorporate that point of view, and so you're constantly trying to exercise sort of empathy for the culture. Um, so it was nice to get to experience that, feeling marginalized, experience directly firsthand something about this culture that uh, is that hurts some people, that is ugly, you could say, while at the same time
Mm.
appreciating it, because it'd be just so easy to be dismissive of that. Oh yeah, is that here? Yeah, you have. Now here we go again. Japanese culture, an expression of cultural supremacy. Japan happens to be like the United States and Argentina too, one of these countries that also think their culture is the center of the world, and it would be easy to just be dismissive of it, but in that context, or uh, experience that expression of a cultural practice and immediately uh, be dismissive of the individual morally for, you know, acting that way, thinking that way. But I got to experience that in a way that I kind of appreciated. Uh, I, there's something in, for example, the pride of having achieved of these values in the culture, these values that I, as a foreigner, failed to enact. This capacity to the sensitivity of other people's feelings, and uh, this way of the deep respect for norms, and the the deep sort of internalization of these values, that there's something beautiful about all of that, and and the pride of an individual who values that culture, the pride in uh, having achieved those values, being able to enact those values, and all of that is almost, it goes hand in hand with the disappointment or the distaste for someone who fails at that, you know? So I was like,
Mm.
I get it. I understand. I see I see it. At the same time, it's ugly that uh, the culture is like that, and the people are treated like second class for, um, uh, yeah. It was, yeah,
If
yeah,
I may,
yeah,
no, no, you were sharing so much, and it's so fascinating, and so much of it really resonates with me, and I don't know why, but maybe that this is the way my brain works, but I'm like I have this like image of like salmon, and like they can either go with the current, right, which is much easier, and they're just swimming underneath the water, right? And maybe that's the kind of like they're deftly kind of going, and maybe it's to be unnoticed, or maybe it's actually that's praised, right, to just kind of continue in that vein. But then you also have the opposite, where you can kind of try to swim against the current and tire yourself out or get frustrated.
yeah.
But you also have like the salmon that can like jump, right? They can like, kind of hop over, but it's very it's just flashy, right? People see it. People take,
Mm-hmm.
well, maybe actually not people. In this example, the bears take notice of it, and they're trying to get
Oh.
you, and so it then becomes treacherous. But nonetheless, like I do resonate with what you're saying about like that feeling of like being an outsider, and not feeling like maybe your efforts to to learn about their culture are being recognized, because of how big that culture is, as opposed to, yourself and like the culture that you're bringing into it. And that, at some point, I know for me, it just kind of became like a decision of like, it's not really for me to like assert a certain like kind of viewpoint on them. It's really about me just trying to like just do the best I can to like absorb and like pick up on what they're doing. And then yeah, and like win that trust like little by little.
Yeah,
But I think that there's something about like that there's so many paradoxes I think that come with like being in another culture, right?
yeah,
It's like the only way you can learn about it is by throwing yourself into like the fire of that culture. But at the same time, there's this resistance and this like hard like pushback that, sometimes they might reject you. They don't want you to be there. Or you might feel that and just, there's like this kind of, intersecting, traffic of like perceptions that maybe it's just too overwhelming and it's too damaging to your own like ego or your own sense of identity. So it's riff with like peril, but at the same time, that's the only way to do it, right? I mean,
right,
like to
right,
go through that difficult process.
right,
You're
and
becoming a new person, right? In essence.
right, and being a citizen of the world is not does not en- doesn't entail that you uh, get to overcome the limitations of a cultural perspective, whether it's a culture that you come from or it's sort of a cultural perspective that becomes your point of view. You know, um, whenever you go through an education, uh, regardless of where you're born, let's say you become a professional, you go to law school and you start a career in that field, and you're looking at things from the point of view of that culture of being a lawyer. So that's a cultural perspective that is your own, but it's acquired. Um, the, there's something noble about aiming to uh, overcome the limits of the cultural perspectives that we bring to our encounters with others. But the goal is not to kind of overcome all of those and be just kind of completely free from any cultural constraints. That will be possible, you know. And then I don't know. I don't think it would be. I'm not sure if it would be desirable. Someone who, is. I mean, I don't even can imagine what it would look like. But um, uh, a part of what it means to be a human being is that we are particular in different ways. We're imperfect in particular ways, and it may be that Appia, another call me Anthony Appia, another um, influential philosopher thinker in this space. Um, he says that the goal of uh, global citizenship is not to tolerate. We are not supposed to be tolerating all kinds of cultural practices. Um, we can uh, be very explicitly against certain things. If there's a culture where something is a tradition, but it's immoral, it harms people. We could be against it, and in interaction with people of those culture, we could say, I think this cultural practice that you have is wrong. You know, um, the example that he gives is um, that I think a wife, it's in some culture, a wife is uh, put to death because she was, she brought shame to the family, something like that. You know, it's cultural practice. That's the way they do it. A lot of uh, norms, traditions are intertwined with this. But you could, as a cosmopolitan, as a citizen of the world, you could just say that's wrong, in that aspect of that culture, I'm not interested in learning. And so tolerance is not the goal. Sometimes not even understanding.
Hmm.
Okay, I don't tolerate this. I think it's wrong. I should avoid it. But maybe what I was describing earlier, I feel I can understand where someone is coming from, even though I don't like it, even though I think it's wrong. I can understand it. It's just not even that. It's a requirement because
Hmm.
there's a lot of stuff going on in the world that we will never understand. We don't even understand why we do certain things, let alone people from other cultural backgrounds. It's just the goal is to just being able to live together. Uh,
Hmm.
being able to just get used to being around each other and being able to live together. Um, I think
If I
there's something
may,
very deep about that. Mm.
yeah, and the one of the words that kind of came up a little bit earlier in the conversation that you mentioned is like the word like sensitivity, and that really got me thinking of like how like we were talking about like perceptions of others, of ourselves, but like also like openness to like put ourselves right in kind of difficult situations or encountering differences and reconciling that in our minds. And I think having a certain like level of sensitivity is important because the opposite of that would be like callousness. Like, it's like it doesn't register, right? Or it's numb. And I think that we kind of find ourselves in society more on that end than the other. But I'm wondering if you agree with that, and if you do, how can we like what do we do to like really allow people to like register those experiences and value them?
Well, Aristotle thought that all virtues are always a balance between two extremes, and the extremes are always vices. And if sensitivity is a thing that we want, that's the virtue. It's got vices on both ends. Maybe we could put callousness as one of the vices, like the just inability to register how other people are feeling. But you could also go, approach a vice on the other end and be so receptive, so open that you're completely passive in a way. It's you fail to push in any way, and I can see that too as being a problem. Usually, what you want is some kind of balance between the two. You want, as an individual and as a society, you want people to be able to um, be responsive to one another, but at the same time not collapse in those interactions, but being able to um, assert a particular point of view. If we were completely open, sensitive, receptive, then we would lose all of our means as individuals. We will be coming together and kind of, uh, dialing into the vibe of that social moment, and then that's what we are. And all of the cases when all of the stories of a hero that goes against the current, that sees that something is just not right, and they stand up and they do something different, even if they put themselves at risk, of bears coming to get them or whatever. Those are examples of some degree of callousness to 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 go and say Rosa Parks refuses to uh, sit in the back of the bus. That's she's failing to. If you're sensitive to the social situation, You don't do that. Obviously, if you do that, you're gonna make people upset, and sometimes that's what the situation requires. Um, I see, for example, the kind of this cultural moment in the United States and in many parts of the world. It's kind of becoming a global phenomenon where cultures are kind of fragmented politically, the left and the right, and it's just not only a question of political parties with particular platforms or agendas, but uh, there's a kind of an ongoing cultural war. People are consume media that is um, constantly training you to have an gut level reaction against certain people, against certain key phrases, and so on. And in that kind of context, some callousness is inevitable and necessary, because if I go and interact with people that are of a different, political persuasion, and I go open-hearted, vulnerable, there are pretty good chances that no, it's not determined, but pretty good chances, because of the cultural context, that in an encounter across differences, I I don't connect with the person, kind of a heart to heart. But in that exchange, the person who perceives me as being of the other side, an enemy on the political divide, what is bringing to bear is all of these internalized habits, you know, to react against someone like me, someone who says talks like me, and uh, so in that kind of encounter, coming in with some level of having the guard up to some degree, it's perhaps not advised, because uh, there's no fertile ground for genuine exchange, learning from one another. So anyway, uh, all of this to say that uh, if that's the tension between being open and being closed and sensitive and callous, that the virtue may fall at different points depending on the context.
Mm. I really appreciate like the way that you were kind of, yeah, explaining that tension between these two different maybe extremes or these different positions, and that there's while we kind of like understand them as maybe like different, like almost like pins in the ground, right? Kind of like destinations itself. I think there's a lot more of like the kind of decision making process and the opportunity to really like think like what is our position and what is our approach to like understanding like if there's like a window of opportunity to like either be more sensitive and to learn from it, or maybe there is this other kind of like signal or like window where it requires something else. And I think that decision-making process really emphasizes more like agentic kind of stance, that like we need to step into that, rather than the more passive, whoa, like this is the culture war, this is kind of the way it is. And I just either go all in and just think it's black and white, or I remove myself and become passive and like seemingly like unaffected. And I think that, we really need, I think, as global citizens to opt towards the agentic route. And then also one where it's still like, while decisions are made, we're we don't have all the answers, right? And so some mistakes will be made. But experience is like so needed, right? And especially ones that are rooted in human interactions and relationships rather than just, maybe AI digital, right? I think that there needs to be this kind of, for us to understand and make sense of ourselves as humans. We still yearn for that. Um, Maybe there is a world in which AI can satisfy a certain need for that. But that is, discussion for like another podcast because, this has been so great to really like, kind of like wrestle with this term of global citizenship. I've really appreciated how our conversation has also been like deeply rooted in our own lived experiences, as we kind of, were fostered as global citizens. And now I really feel, that we're doing the work to make sense of it, within the realm of like academia, amongst other, like great philosophers, right, in your domain, right, really making sense of like where the discourse is and how can we really, um, yeah, kind of like provide more clarity. I don't know if it's understanding or if it's just new insight into like new pathways, so that we can alleviate some of the suffering that we see taking place within society. Because I opt towards a world that's more, you know, harmonious, or that really seeks like to like favor like the good side of people, rather than the divisive kind of more negative or even evil characteristics that they kind of assume that we have. So this has been really a wonderful conversation. I wanted to ask one last question, if that's okay. It's a book or movie recommendation, or any recommendation really. Anything you'd like to share with the listeners?
I really enjoyed reading um, a memoir, autobiography of Karlover Knausgaard. It's a Norwegian writer, and he calls it "My Struggle." That's the name of the of the book. Uh, yeah, I love it. There's something about his style. It's so nice. It's huge. It has many volumes. The first one is my favorite. Yeah, he's great.
Yeah, I mean, isn't life just one struggle after another? So I think it makes sense in terms of like how we how we navigate the culture, how we navigate society, just even our just immediate family. That's already a struggle. But yeah, but thank you so much for that recommendation, Gonzalo. And again, it's just this has been so wonderful to have this space with you, and I feel like I've learned a lot more about you, and then also just it's I think very stimulating to like think more critically and deeply on this concept. Um, any last thoughts? Any final words? I wanted to give you the last word.
Maybe as we were talking about, encounters across differences, people bringing in prejudices, um, preconceived ideas that may get in the way of people coming to connect with one another. Um, that's just very common. Uh, you don't need to travel internationally for that. This can happen within a family. You come into a situation with a whole set of assumptions, and and the other person is bringing their own, and there's just no meaningful communication. You're just clashing. Um, if I had to pick one thing that is what defines a global citizen, it would be the capacity to come into encounters across different situations like that and being able to find something new. If what you bring from your background is not uh, is allowing you to connect with people, to share a sense of understanding, um, be able to create something new out of that situation. And we could call that value creation. And I think it's a capacity that we can cultivate.